Hello everyone, I'll go over another very exciting game from round 8 of the US Championship, and this one was played between Shankland and Hikaru Nakamura. Before round 8, Hikaru had definitely one of his worst performances so far in the last couple of years. He had 3 out of 7 with 6 draws and 1 loss from round 7, so a terrible performance so far. And Shankland was actually sharing first place with Fabiano Caruana after 7 rounds, so much more than what was expected of him, I think, at the US Championship. And in the game, Hikaru Nakamura had the white pieces, and I mean, okay, there's a limit to how serious you can play an opening, and he's known for his hyper-modern stuff and risky opening choices, but in this game he played the NImzo-Larsen Attack, the nimzovitsch-larsen Attack with pawn to b3, which I think is a bit too risky against a player as strong as Shankland. Now, I know there's people that think that 1b3 is as strong and as justified as pawn to e4 and pawn to d4, but it just isn't, and especially today when you have the engines, when you can see that black equalizes in almost every variation. I mean, if you want to go for a win, okay, practically this will give you chances, but Shankland is a very good player. He's almost 2700, so I don't know what Nakamura expected, actually. In the game, Shankland went for e5, the modern variation of the Nimzo-Larsen Attack. We have bishop to b2, knight c6, e3, knight to f6. These are all the standard moves, the main line. But after bishop to b5, the most common move for black would be bishop to d6. And after knight a3, knight to a5, bishop e2 would be the most common move, retreating the bishop, a6, c4 castles, and knight to c2. And the plan for white is to push the pawn to d4, support that with the knight, play knight to f3, castle short, and that's it. And black has already castled, and this game is okay for both sides. However, black, as I said, has already equalized and perhaps even has a slight advantage, but nothing major. But anyway, white knows that if he goes for this line with pawn to b3, if black goes for the modern variation, that he will be worse after move 5 or 6, most likely. But after bishop to b5, Shankland didn't go for the most common move, bishop to d6. He played a move that has only been played 20 or 30 times before in higher rated games, and that's the move e4. And of course, Hikaru Nakamura was prepared for this. He had to be, but still, I don't think it was what he expected. And here, the most common move and the best move is knight to e2, controlling f4 and d4 and preparing to castle. And after, let's say, h5, d3, a6, bishop c6, dc6, knight b to c3, white would be equal, and he would stand okay. However, after e4, Hikaru Nakamura went for f3, immediately weakening the e4 pawn, and that's a slight inaccuracy because black doesn't actually have to react yet. Black plays a6, forcing the bishop to give itself up, and arguably the knight is better than the bishop in this position, especially because it could come to the e5 square in some variations, and this is white's strongest piece, so there's never an option to give it up. So bishop c6, dc6, queen to e2 by Hikaru Nakamura, and I think it was better to develop the knight to e2 once again, and even at the cost of having to take gf3 if black captures, and to castle queenside, but queen to e2 is okay as well. In this position, Shankland plays his first inaccuracy, and he could have kept a lot of pressure on white's position because he already now does stand better with the move bishop c5, and this move is developing the bishop to the most active square, and it's preventing white from developing normally and having any sort of counterplay, because black is much faster to start an attack, especially with the aggressive pawn on e4 and the knight on f6 and both bishops now. The bishop on c8 is virtually developed already. So white would continue with knight to c3, and after queen e7, you can see that there's a lot of pressure on white's king already. So fe4, bishop to g4 would be played, first gaining a tempo on the queen, and after knight to f3, knight e4, queen e4, and you can see who stands better here clearly. So after queen to e2, the best try was bishop to c5. But he played bishop to f5, reinforcing the e4 pawn, and now white has equalized. And it's sad to say white has equalized on move 7, but yeah, Nakamura managed to equalize. So fe4, bishop e4, we have d3 challenging the bishop, bishop to g6, knight to c3, and this was apparently a mistake. And what he should have played is either knight to d2 or knight to f3, preparing to castle short, because it's already too risky to castle queenside. But perhaps even Nakamura is suffering from pattern recognition and programming in chess that you are used to castling queenside in the Nimzo-Larsen, so you always castle queenside. But I think in this position it's already justified to say that white is much safer if he castles kingside, and he will have a solid attacking chances because he has a better pawn structure and more central pawns. So I don't see a problem with playing knight to f3 and castling short. But of course Hikaru Nakamura is Hikaru Nakamura because he plays aggressive chess, so he goes for knight to c3. After knight to c3, now once again black is better, because if white castles queenside, he is too unsafe. If he doesn't, he wasted the tempo because the knight was more useful on d2. So now bishop to c5 is played, castles long, and now this is like saying to Sam Shankland, okay, try and defeat me, I'm better than you tactically, so you won't be able to. But I don't know how smart this was, and I think Nakamura made a mistake trying to be too brave in this position. Now queen to e7, e4 is played, expanding in the center and restraining some of black's pieces from moving, namely this bishop on g6, restraining it on the diagonal. We have bishop to a3, and now from an engine perspective, when I was analyzing the game, the engines didn't like this move, but practically speaking, I think it's a great idea to exchange white's main defender, and white's strongest piece. And usually, when a player fianchettos, the squares around his king will be weakened if the fianchettoed bishop gets exchanged off. And especially in this position, when Hikaru Nakamura has played b3 and d3, which means that all the dark squares are terminally weak around the king. So if the bishop gets exchanged, then the dark squares are just lethal for white. So this is a good move. And now, of course, white can't avoid the trade. Hikaru here plays g4, which is a fairly aggressive move, but I'm not sure it was such a good idea. Firstly, because black hasn't even castled yet. So a5, and now Shankland is starting an attack. g5, forcing the knight to a, knight to h5. And now after queen to e3, of course, he had to defend the g5 pawn. Black is significantly better, and I think black is 3 or 4 moves away from starting an attack which will look deadly. Now he castles, first before going on to the attack, knight g to e2, b5, and now would you be scared if you had the white pieces? I mean, this is only a slight advantage, theoretically, but practically I'm not sure that too many people could survive this for too long. We have bishop a3, and of course Nakamura wants to get his king to b1 to some safety, and if he plays king to b1 now, then Shankland would play bishop takes b2, so that would be just a waste of tempo. So he plays bishop a3, queen a3, and now king to b1. And after king to b1, Shankland is, if you ask the engines, now he is completely winning already, and I'm not sure how Nakamura managed to survive, but he did. First a4, knight to c1, trying to defend, and apparently after a4 there was one move which kept Nakamura in the game and which kept almost equality, and that would be knight to d4, even though it's very much counterintuitive. First of all, c5 doesn't work because knight to b5, any knight to b5, gaining a tempo on the queen. So queen to c5 would have to be played, pinning the knight. But it isn't really a problem because of knight c to e2, rook fd8, let's say attacking for the second time, rook hf1, knight to d7, rook to d7, sorry, and white would even have knight to f5 at any point because this is uncovering an attack on the queen, and if queen takes, knight takes. So white would be able to untangle and relieve a lot of pressure from the position, but after a4, Nakamura went for knight to c1, which is too passive and it doesn't really do that much. Of course, knight to d4 was attacking the c5 pawn, so that was the point. Now rook f to b8, increasing the pressure, getting the rook to the most active file, rook h to e1, and now just c5. And now that the b5 pawn is defended, c5 does work. King to a1, a takes b3. This is now, if you ask the engines, I can turn on the evaluation so that you can see. You can see the bar on the right side of the board, and this means that black is winning. This is about -2 or even -2.5. So how Nakamura managed to pull this off is a wonder. So after a takes b3, he of course takes with the c pawn. We have c4, and now knight to b1, gaining a tempo on the queen, but this is now even worse than it was. Queen to a6, rook to d2, and now f5 is played by Sam Shankland, which unfortunately for him loses most of his advantage. And why that isn't that easy to spot actually. His best try in this position, I'm sorry, let me turn off the engine. His best try in this position was queen to e6, and queen to e6 is increasing pressure on this diagonal, of course, and there are even possibilities of a rook sacrifice. So let's say rook to b2, solidifying the position, and if pawn takes, then rook takes or knight takes. Then queen to e5 would be played, pinning the rook. d4, even though this is now weakening the e4 pawn, white has to relieve some of the pressure. And now after queen to d6, black is of course much better. So queen to e6 was the best try. The second option after rook to d2 was to play f6, and this isn't to challenge the pawn. The sole purpose of this is to transfer the bishop to this diagonal, and you can see where it's most needed. And after, let's say, rook to b2, solidifying the position, bishop to f7, black would be completely winning, and all of his pieces but the knight on h5 would be perfectly placed. But after rook to d2, Sam Shankland played f5, and this now gives white counterplay, which is not that smart. And why would you give Hikaru Nakamura counterplay if you can just crush him slowly? Of course, now ef5, bishop f5. Firstly, now the bishop can't go to the most active diagonal. And secondly, white always has some checking squares now and some possibilities. But now, what Nakamura should have done was knight to c3. After knight to c3, let's say queen to a5, pinning the knight, and knight to d5, believe it or not, white is better. I can turn on the engine so you can see it now once again. The position is equal, or white has a slight advantage. And I don't know how he missed this. He was at about, I think he had about 20 minutes or 15 minutes left on the clock at this point, so I'm sure he could have spent some more time to calculate this. But after bishop f5, Hikaru Nakamura played b5, and this is such a horrible move visually, practically, and I don't know, considering king safety, that how can you play b4? Why would you play b4? What's the point of b4? Okay, he is preventing the move b4 from black, but what would that do? That wouldn't do anything. Just play knight to c3 and solidify. I mean, of course, probably none of us could be even slightly compared to Hikaru Nakamura, but there are some moves that he makes which are so complicated that they're just bad. And I don't know what he was thinking, but b4 is horrible. And this now gives Shankland back his advantage. Even though he made a mistake, Hikaru Nakamura just gave it back immediately. And now the move is queen to g6. Now we can see that there's a lot of pressure on d3, there's a lot of pressure on g5, and something's gotta give, and something will drop in Hikaru Nakamura's position. We have rook f1, challenging the bishop, c6, and this is a very important move because Hikaru is going to play knight to c3 at some point, and that means that b5 is defended and the d5 square is safe. So now knight to c3 is played, rook to e8, queen to f3, and after rook to e8 he should have played queen to c5. This was a much more active square, but black would still take on g5. But after rook to e8, Hikaru plays queen to f3, and now the best move for Shankland was to take the g5 pawn. He took on d3 instead. It's also good. Black is winning, completely winning. Now materially winning as well. We have knight d3, rook to f8, offering a trade of rooks when the queen moves, queen to d1. Now c takes d3, regaining the piece. And now Nakamura decides to take away a pair of rooks from the board and relieve some of the pressure from his position. And now the attack is no longer looking that scary after rook f8, and rook takes d3, of course. Now the material is equal. However, if you consider king safety, I don't think that black's king could be safer in this position. It's perfectly placed, and white's king is just horrible. And there are pins that could happen. There's a lot of stuff that could happen. And first of all, black is in a position to go a pawn up if he wishes to. And I'm not sure if that was the smartest idea. Perhaps a move such as rook to f2 was better in this position. But then, of course, Hikaru could have played h4 solidifying, so he just took the pawn on g5. And this decreases the advantage slightly, but a pawn is a pawn. We have rook to d6 now, attacking the c6 pawn, queen to f4. And now queen to f4 was a mistake, of course. If rook to c6, then the queen can always grab the h2 pawn, but that wasn't the point. After rook to c6, Sam Shankland played queen takes b4, taking the b4 pawn, but now Hikaru has a great resource with just draws, and queen to d5 check, king to h8, and queen takes b5. This is now forcing a draw practically. Of course, if you ask the engines, black still has a slight edge because of king safety, but there's nothing really in the position. After queen f4 and queen to c5, they agreed to a draw, and there's nothing Shankland can do to improve anymore. The position is just a draw. But what's important, what was great about this game, at about this point, I think around here, knight takes d3, rook f8, queen to d1, around queen d1, and c takes d3, Hikaru Nakamura had, I think, 3 or 4 minutes on the clock, maybe 5. But anyway, he was in time trouble while Sam Shankland had about 25 minutes left or 20 minutes left. And at one point, Hikaru he took off his jacket, it fell off his shoulders, you could see he was concentrating, and he started calculating. And of course, when he wants to play well, when he's focused, then he can calculate more than most other players. And he saw all this, and he saw that his position was lost, but he probably saw the exact way to draw that, and probably this was the only option, and he managed to do that. And you could see that at one point, I think around here, after after rook takes d3, he saw that, okay, I'm going to draw. Queen g5, queen to d6, rook to d6, sorry, and after queen to f4, he just put his jacket back on, and this is where you could see that he's relaxed and that he knows that he's drawing and the pressures of the position. But despite his great escape in this game, his performance is still just appalling in the US Championship. He has 7 draws and 1 defeat, almost 2 defeats, and he's definitely not winning the championship anymore, that's clear. But he's going to lose so much rating points that he will have a hard time going back to close to 2800. Okay, everybody, I hope you like this risky Nimzo-Larsen attack by Hikaru Nakamura and this amazing attacking game by Sam Shankland, who could have been in clear first had he put a bit more pressure on Nakamura's position. Unfortunately for him, he didn't. And unfortunately for Nakamura, he managed to escape the onslaught. Okay, thanks very much for watching and stay tuned for more chess. Thanks very much. Bye.